Number 16. Carleen Gearing. In September 2021, Southwest Airlines employees at McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas refused to let 21-year-old Carleen Gearing board a flight due to her belligerent behavior. They told the young woman that she wouldn't be allowed to rebook with the airline, but Gearing allegedly didn't want to take no for an answer. The situation escalated, and a staff member called the police. A supervisor explained the situation to responding officers, who tried to relay the information back to Gearing, but apparently she continued yelling and fell onto the floor at some point throughout the interaction. When it became clear that Gearing wasn't going to cooperate, the police handcuffed her and told her that she was under arrest. According to an arrest report, she acted combative and spat at the officers, who noted in the complaint that Gearing's breath smelled of alcohol and that she seemed intoxicated. She slipped out of her handcuffs several times and ended up being hobbled so she couldn't kick at the officers from the back of the police cruiser. Then, after being medically cleared by paramedics, she was booked into custody on charges of battery on a protected person, resisting an officer, and violating airport rules and regulations. The judge released Gearing on her own recognizance with orders to stay out of trouble and stay away from Southwest Airlines employees. While it's unclear how Gearing's Las Vegas case turned out, records show that she was arrested in Maricopa County, Arizona in October 2023 on a charge of criminal damage. Number 15. Cameron Gibson. In a bizarre Memorial Day outburst that was captured on camera in 2023, a 25-year-old Kansas woman named Cameron Gibson allegedly began kicking the passenger in front of her on a Southwest Airlines plane that was taxiing to the runway at Louis Armstrong New Orleans International Airport. Her behavior was so out of control that the pilots turned the plane around and returned to the gate. Jefferson Parish deputies were called to remove Gibson from the aircraft, but they said that she was unresponsive to their attempts to peacefully coax her off the flight. Footage captured by onlookers showed two deputies removing the young woman off the plane. Gibson didn't seem to fully understand what was going on and could be heard saying, "I'm literally so confused. What's happening? And I literally need my phone." Later on in the video, she asked again what was going on, and passengers were happy to let her know that she was under arrest while one of the deputies handcuffed her. According to police, Gibson fought with the deputies as they dragged her out of the plane and onto the jet bridge, where the struggle continued. She was accused of kicking two deputies and biting another in the thigh, and was restrained in a wheelchair for the sake of keeping her under control. Authorities charged Gibson with 3 counts of battery on a police officer, 2 counts of resisting an officer, disturbing the peace while drunk, and criminal mischief. She was released on a $9,750 bond with instructions to return to court at a later date. Footage of the ordeal went viral on TikTok, with some commenters calling for heightened alcohol restrictions at airports, while others said that an outright ban on boozy drinks would be more appropriate. It may sound extreme, but the incident occurred amid a spate of other alcohol-induced outbursts at airports and on airplanes. Number 14. Irate Icelandic passenger gets put in his place. In early 2013, a photo of a man duct-taped to an airplane seat went viral. The image first appeared in a blog run by New York businessman Andy Elwood, who told NBC News that he received the picture from a friend that he likes to trade travel war stories with. The friend didn't want his identity revealed, but Elwood was happy to relay the story in detail. According to the blog post, the 46-year-old passenger drank all his duty-free liquor during an Icelandic Airlines flight from Iceland to New York City. He allegedly tried to choke the woman in the seat next to him and screamed that the plane was going to crash, prompting nearby passengers to tape and bind him to his seat for the remainder of the flight. And when the plane landed, police escorted the unruly man off the aircraft. A Port Authority spokesperson confirmed the incident to NBC and revealed that the passenger was taken to a nearby hospital due to suspicions that he was intoxicated. After being treated, he was released without charges. It may seem surprising, given the explosive nature of the outburst, but witnesses were reportedly reluctant to discuss the incident with investigators. An airline representative told Icelandic media that it's standard for zip ties and tape to be kept on the company's planes in case situations like this one arise. Number 13. Disruptive passenger meets duct tape. During an American Airlines flight from Dallas, Texas to Charlotte, North Carolina in July of 2021, a female first-class passenger had a terrifying mental breakdown of sorts. The outburst began 2 hours into the 3-hour flight when the woman allegedly tried to open the front boarding door. She also assaulted and bit a flight attendant, according to an airline spokesperson, who confirmed the incident after footage captured by a TikToker named Ariana Mathina went viral. The video showed flight attendants rushing around the plane, locking bathroom doors and gathering in the front of the aircraft. Mathina said that the chaos began at around 1:30 a.m. when panicked employees began whispering in hushed tones to one another and running frantically up and down the aisles. The flight attendants weren't saying anything to the passengers, but they could tell that something was wrong. While travelers waited anxiously to learn what was going on, the pilot came on the intercom and instructed everyone to remain seated. He acknowledged that there was a bad situation occurring and reassured everyone that the crew was working to remedy the issue. Shortly thereafter, the mentally disturbed woman began screaming loudly. It was only after flight attendants bound her to a seat and covered her mouth with duct tape that onlookers learned what had happened. The woman remained secured to the seat for the rest of the flight, and thankfully the plane touched down safely at its destination, where the troubled passenger was taken into custody by paramedics without further incident. Number 12. Vivana Konz. Imagine being the person who sealed an airline's decision to no longer serve alcoholic beverages during flights. A Sacramento woman named Vivana Konz earned that distinction in May of 2021 when she repeatedly refused to obey standard in-flight procedure during her plane's final descent into San Diego. According to the U.S. Attorney's Office, Konz ignored a flight attendant's request for her to put on her seatbelt. A short while later, she once again refused to fasten her seatbelt and fold her tray table. She was also wearing her COVID mask improperly and had no apparent intentions of fixing it. Instead of complying, Konz shouted obscenities at the flight attendant. She then began to record the interaction with her phone before getting out of her seat and shoving the employee. A nearby passenger captured footage of the assault that followed, while several others tried to intervene by grabbing at Konz's arms and clothing. The violence stopped when a man wedged himself between Konz and the flight attendant and ordered the aggressive passenger to sit down. After the plane landed, the flight attendant was treated at a nearby hospital for multiple injuries. She had a black eye, a cut to her face that required stitches, and 3 broken teeth, including 2 that were knocked out, and ended up needing crowns. Following the unprovoked assault, Southwest Airlines stopped serving in-flight alcoholic beverages. In announcing the change, head of in-flight operations Sonia Lacour didn't blame Konz's behavior specifically, instead citing a rise in passenger disruptions as the reason for the new policy. She acknowledged that it was a disappointing change for some customers, but that it felt necessary for the sake of protecting the safety of both customers and crew members. Konz pleaded guilty to 1 count of interference with flight crew members and attendants, and as a result, she was sentenced to 15 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of probation, during which time she was banned from traveling on commercial flights and was required to attend anger management. The judge also ordered Konz to pay nearly $26,000 in restitution and a $7,500 fine. Number 11. Adelaide Gabriel Shang. The morning of July 7, 2021 got off to a busy start for Port Authority officers in Lee County, Florida, who were summoned to an arriving Delta flight at Southwest Florida International Airport to escort an unruly passenger off the aircraft. As the officers entered the plane at around 7:30 a.m., a flight attendant explained that 23-year-old Adelaide Gabriel Shang was acting strange and had repeatedly disobeyed instructions to put on her COVID mask. The Sarasota woman also allegedly spat at other passengers and was being disruptive in other ways. An officer told Shang that the captain was kicking her off the plane and that she was no longer welcome on the flight, but she refused to exit the aircraft. Instead of gathering her belongings and doing as she was told, Shang argued with the officers. She allegedly showed telltale signs of intoxication, including glassy eyes and slurred speech, indicating that alcohol or some other mind-altering substance may have played a role in her behavior. behavior. The officers ended up having to forcibly remove Shang from the plane, and she continued to yell and act combative as she was being handcuffed and placed inside a cop car. In early 2022, Shang pleaded no contest to misdemeanor counts of trespassing and resisting or obstructing an officer without violence. The judge sentenced her to 6 months of probation and ordered her to undergo a psychiatric evaluation as well as a substance abuse evaluation. Number 10. A family fiasco. A simple request to trade seats quickly escalated into a massive brawl involving at least a dozen women from 2 families on a GOL Airlines flight that was waiting to take off from Salvador, Brazil for Congonhas in early 2023. According to news reports, the explosive altercation began when a mother asked a woman to swap seats so she could sit next to her special needs child. The woman said no, and the mother immediately attacked her. Members of both parties quickly joined in on the fight, which was captured on camera by shocked bystanders. Footage of the altercation showed one woman trying to jump over a seat and being held back by a flight attendant, while another female passenger ran over, grabbed the woman by the hair, and began smacking her in the face repeatedly. Another woman was also seen pulling on the lady's hair while sitting on top of a seat, only to realize that her tube top had slid down and was exposing her bare chest. Flight attendants fought to get the situation under control as people screamed at, slammed, and tussled with each other in the middle of the aircraft. Employees eventually managed to subdue the brawling passengers, resulting in 15 people being kicked off the plane. After that, the flight finally took off after being delayed for nearly 2 hours. In addition to being removed from the flight and having their travel plans interrupted, the individuals involved in the fight had the added embarrassment of being seen in a viral clip that garnered millions of views within days of appearing on social media. Number 9. Jeffrey Tanner Libby. In December 2018, a 21-year-old American college student named Jeffrey Tanner Libby downed an entire liter of Bacardi rum during a jam-packed British Airways flight from London to Dallas. He reportedly began drinking shortly after departing from Heathrow Airport. And according to reports, Libby had just been broken up with over text messages by his girlfriend of 1 year, leading him to alleviate his emotional pain by hitting the bottle, which, as most of us know, is usually a terrible idea. The Texas Christian University student became belligerently drunk and began acting abusive toward the people around him. According to reports, it all started when Libby accused the passenger in front of him of moving their seat back and began punching and kicking the back of the chair. Crew members asked the young man to calm down, but he allegedly did the exact opposite. During the explosive tantrum that followed, Libby was accused of grabbing a female passenger, yelling and swearing at people, assaulting a flight attendant, and spitting and biting at employees and passengers as they attempted to restrain him. One man tried to help subdue Libby by holding his head, but his finger slipped into Libby's mouth, and the raging traveler bit down on his hand. Libby's behavior became so out of control that the pilot turned the plane around and flew back to London, forcing the crew to dump 22 tons of fuel in order to land safely. In addition to delaying nearly 200 people's travels just days before Christmas, the sudden change in plans cost the airline hundreds of thousands of dollars. After leaving Britain earlier than planned to return to the US, Libby ended up extending his stay in the country by more than half a year. About a month after the incident, he pleaded guilty to 1 count of drunkenness on an aircraft, 1 count of using threatening, abusive, or insulting words toward the cabin crew, and 3 counts of assault occasioning bodily harm. During his sentencing hearing, his defense attorney urged the judge to issue a suspended jail sentence based on Libby's promise to attend a treatment program in Texas, but the judge felt that a 6-month prison sentence was more appropriate for the young man, whose parents wept loudly in the courtroom as the punishment was handed down. Number 8. Kyong Cha Kim. While waiting to board a Hawaiian Airlines plane in Honolulu in February 2019, a 48-year-old South Korean national named Kyong Cha Kim downed an entire bottle of whiskey. 4 hours into the 11-hour flight to Incheon, South Korea, he allegedly bothered fellow passengers and lunged at a flight attendant, who confronted him about his inappropriate behavior and asked him to calm down. FBI Special Agent Jason White later told USA Today that Kim tried to punch the flight attendant, but that he was too intoxicated to make contact with the employee. White also confirmed that alcohol was a factor in Kim's reckless actions. The situation got out of hand enough for the pilot to decide that it was best to turn the plane around, and as the aircraft headed back to Honolulu, US military members who were on the flight restrained Kim. Members of local and federal law enforcement were waiting to meet the unruly passenger when the plane touched down in Hawaii. Kim was taken to a federal detention center, and a flight eventually departed once again for South Korea. Several months after the incident, Kim was found guilty of interfering with flight attendants and crew members, and in addition to receiving a 6-month jail sentence, he was ordered to foot the $172,000 bill for the costs associated with having to turn the flight around. Number 7. Brawling Brits booted from plane. During a KLM Royal Dutch Airlines flight from Manchester to Amsterdam in May of 2022, a huge fight erupted between 6 British passengers. A shocking video captured by an onlooker showed a tall man in a blue shirt pummeling another man relentlessly while others tried to separate him from his opponent. But the attack continued, and as bystanders pulled the assailant away from the victim, he switched from throwing punches to repeatedly kicking his adversary. The man eventually backed off while others continued to go at it, paying no mind to crew members' attempts to break up the fight. One flight attendant could be seen trying to wrestle one of the individuals involved into a seat while yelling at the unruly passenger for his behavior. In the meantime, bystanders could be heard yelling at the aggressive travelers to stop fighting. Crew members eventually managed to get the situation under control, but the violence had gotten so out of hand that the pilot called the police to ensure that they'd be ready and waiting to escort the brawling parties off the flight once the plane touched down in the Netherlands. Unfortunately, it's unclear what triggered the explosive encounter. According to the passenger who posted the viral footage on Twitter, someone had made a racist comment earlier in the flight. Tensions continued to rise from there, eventually leading to an all-out exchange of physical blows. All 6 passengers were promptly arrested upon arriving in Amsterdam, and authorities launched an investigation into the matter. However, it's unclear whether the suspects ever faced criminal charges. Number 6. James August. A non-stop flight from Honolulu to New York was forced to turn around in November 2016 when a drunk New Jersey man named James August mistreated his girlfriend and her 3 kids who were seated nearby. Federal prosecutors claimed that one of the girlfriend's children accused August of calling their mother a derogatory name and insulting and threatening the family. Another one of the kids broke out into tears and asked a flight attendant to keep August away from them. According to court documents, August was drinking before and during the flight. A flight attendant asked him to move to another part of the plane, but instead of cooperating, he allegedly backhanded the employee's shoulder, making her feel threatened. Crew members later told investigators that August was shouting and swearing, causing them to worry that he might physically hurt his girlfriend. Law enforcement was waiting to escort August off the plane when the flight touched down back in Honolulu. In the meantime, Hawaiian Airlines employees were tasked with finding other flights for passengers and providing delayed travelers with meal vouchers. In early 2017, August pleaded guilty to interfering with a flight crew. He told the judge that he didn't remember what happened during the flight, but he didn't deny that he was aggressive and threatening. August faced a potential maximum prison sentence of 20 years and a fine of up to $250,000, along with restitution. The judge sentenced him to 3 years of probation and ordered him to pay nearly $98,000 to Hawaiian Airlines to cover the costs of having to turn the plane around, including fuel, maintenance, ground crew, replacement flight crew, and more. It may sound like a lot of money, but August was lucky enough to avoid having to pay the nearly $47,000 worth of meal vouchers that the airline provided to delayed passengers in both Hawaii and New York. Number 5. Kelly Picardo and Lisa Rodriguez. In February 2021, a 32-year-old New York woman named Kelly Picardo and her friend Lisa Rodriguez became so disruptive on a flight from Dallas to Los Angeles that the pilot diverted the aircraft to Phoenix in order to have them removed. Shortly after the incident, Phoenix authorities told the Arizona Republic that passengers accused Picardo and Rodriguez, who were sitting in first class, of using racial slurs, spitting on a man, and physically trying to stop him from recording their behavior with his phone. According to a federal criminal indictment, Picardo also assaulted a flight attendant who tried to intervene. Upon landing in Phoenix, both women were escorted off the plane and arrested. American Airlines also placed them on a no-fly list pending the outcome of an investigation into the disturbing and unacceptable allegations. Picardo pleaded guilty to one count of interfering with a flight crew, and as part of a plea agreement, she admitted to yelling and cursing at a fellow passenger and knowingly intimidating the flight attendant, who stepped in when the situation got heated. In a sentencing memo, Picardo's defense attorneys urged the judge to spare their client from prison time. The document acknowledges that the defendant used a variation of a racial slur that was directed at a black passenger who allegedly tried to flirt with Rodriguez. According to the version of events put forth by Picardo's lawyers, the situation escalated when the passenger tapped one of the women on the shoulder and told them not to use the racial slur. The judge sentenced Picardo to 4 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of probation. It was an arguably small price to pay compared to the $9,123 in restitution that she was ordered to pony up to American Airlines. In a news release announcing the sentence, U.S. Attorney Gary Restaino stated that there is a line between boorish behavior on an airplane and criminal activity. He said that Picardo crossed that line and cited the case as an example of how first-class passengers aren't immune from prosecution. Lisa Rodriguez was also convicted of interfering with a flight crew. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation and was ordered to undergo substance abuse treatment and drug tests. Additionally, she was required to pay $9,123 in restitution. Number 4. Francisco Severo Torres. A Boston-bound United Airlines flight was less than an hour away from its destination in early March 2023 when an alarm alerted crew members that someone had tampered with an emergency exit. Someone had disarmed the door's handle from the fully locked position. Shortly before the alarm went off, a flight attendant noticed 33-year-old Francisco Severo Torres lurking near the exit. When confronted by employees, Torres asked if the accused act had been captured on camera. His behavior was concerning enough for a flight attendant to tell the captain that they believed Torres was a danger to everyone aboard the aircraft and that it was a good idea to land the plane as soon as possible. A short while later, Torres allegedly charged at 2 flight attendants with a broken metal spoon while they were keeping an eye on the emergency door. The suspect was accused of stabbing one of the flight attendants in the neck 3 times with the repurposed cutlery. Passengers jumped in to help subdue Torres, and thankfully he was restrained until the plane arrived in Boston. Witnesses told law enforcement that the crazed passenger had asked someone to show him where the emergency exit's handle was in the plane's safety card during the introductory safety briefing at the beginning of the flight. Footage captured by a nearby passenger appeared to show Torres making several bizarre statements, including, "They're going to have to shoot me down today." He also said he was waiting for them to point a gun at me so I can show everybody that I won't die. According to police, Torres also threatened to kill everyone on the plane and identified himself as Balthazar, the son of Dracula. During questioning, the suspect reportedly told interrogators that he wouldn't die if someone shot or stabbed him, and that he was capable of rising from the dead. And shortly after being taken into custody, he was accused of assaulting a corrections officer. Torres was hit with federal charges of interference and attempted interference, which both carry a maximum sentence of life in prison if convicted. The judge overseeing the case ordered a psychiatric evaluation and ultimately ruled that Torres was incompetent to stand trial, despite the defendant's insistence that he was competent to move forward with the case. Torres requested to be released so he could investigate a conspiracy that he believed had caused his bizarre behavior on the plane, but his attorney asked the judge to place him in a mental hospital, and in the end, the judge denied the release and granted the defense lawyer's request for hospitalization. In September 2023, a grand jury indicted Torres on the charges. But the case remains at a standstill for now, while the court waits to see if his mental health can be restored to competency so that the hearings can proceed. Number 3. Safia Allen. Lauren Phillips was working as a boarding agent for Spirit Airlines at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport in May 2018 when a woman ran past the gate, down the ramp and onto the plane without properly checking in. Later identified as Safia Allen, she plopped down into a seat that was reserved for another passenger. Phillips tried removing Allen from the plane, but she allegedly refused to exit the aircraft and began broadcasting the interaction on Facebook Live. She went on a bizarre tirade, which didn't make much sense, but she appeared to have a problem with the name of the airline. In the video, Allen could be heard saying, "You'll need to change your name because nothing Holy Spirit about this airline." She continued to yell at crew members and passengers throughout the 20-minute video, and she accused airline employees of causing her to miss an earlier flight by closing the gate early. At one point, she could be heard saying, "I'm not getting off. You're going to have to call the people." Several minutes later, a crew member ordered everyone off the plane to redo the boarding process. Passengers could be heard moaning and groaning with disappointment over the delay, and many people didn't hesitate to direct their frustrations at Allen for causing the unnecessary holdup. One person could be heard saying, "Are you kidding me?" while another said, "Congratulations, you're the donkey of the day." Allen continued to raise her voice as she shouted back at the frustrated passengers, shouting, "If I can't go to Las Vegas, neither can y'all." She told several people that they were going to hell, gesturing toward the exit while saying, "Hell is that way," and made some disturbingly insensitive comments toward a group of Asian passengers. After everyone else had cleared out of the aircraft, Allen headed toward the cockpit and volunteered to drive the plane, while a crew member blocked her from going any further. Everyone left the aircraft voluntarily except Allen, who finally grabbed her bag and deplaned after police officers came on board, prepared to remove her by force if necessary. She continued streaming the incident on Facebook Live as she reluctantly followed the officers' orders to get off the plane. Allen was charged with criminal trespass, simple battery, and obstruction of a law enforcement officer. Apparently, though, she came to her senses shortly after the incident, based on a Facebook post apologizing for her behavior. Number 2. Abusive Aussie versus Angry American. In early December 2023, a 44-year-old Australian man became unbearably belligerent during a scoot flight from Perth to Singapore. He allegedly insulted fellow passengers and demanded alcoholic beverages from crew members, and his behavior only worsened after reaching Singapore, where he transferred to a flight bound for the Philippine capital of Manila. According to a traveler who was on both flights and captured footage of the disturbing ordeal, the man spent hours ranting during the second leg of the journey. He was so loud and disruptive that the passenger and her travel companion eventually decided to move seats. As the plane landed in Manila, the unruly flyer noticed that an American passenger was filming him. He asked the traveler, who was from Las Vegas, what he was filming, and then mocked the man when he tried answering the question. The two parties briefly exchanged heated words, during which the belligerent Aussie challenged the American to fight one-on-one once the plane landed. And as the men flung insults back and forth and called each other names, the Australian man mocked the American traveler's accent. He continued sarcastically running his mouth, even as nearby passengers began chiming in for the two to stop arguing and leave each other alone. Unfortunately, though, the men decided that they were in no mood to wait until the flight landed to fight. As the seated American passenger repeatedly challenged the Australian to hit him, the Australian struck him in the face, hitting him so hard that his hat flew off his head. The video then cuts to footage of the Australian man sitting dazed on the floor of the aircraft with blood all over his face and a shoe in his hand. It was clear, based on his visible injuries and the American man's triumphant demeanor, who'd won the fight and who'd lost. According to witnesses, the confrontation broke out into a fistfight between the men, and at some point, other passengers joined in and kicked the Australian man onto the floor. With help from several of the men involved, flight attendants broke the fight up and zip-tied the man's arms and legs. The Australian man looked noticeably embarrassed in the moments before he was led off the aircraft by police officers. In the meantime, the American man bragged from his seat about how he'd warned the hostile passenger that he'd beat him up. Passengers could be heard clapping and cheering as the injured party was removed from the plane. It's unclear whether he faced any criminal charges for his role in the disturbance, though. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. Number 1. Maxwell Berry. After finishing his first 2 alcoholic beverages during a Frontier Airlines flight from Philadelphia to Miami in July 2021, 22-year-old Maxwell Berry decided he wanted a third. While asking a flight attendant for a refill, the Ohio resident brushed his empty cup against her backside. The woman told Berry not to touch her and served him the second drink. A short while later, Berry spilled the drink on himself, so he went to the restroom to clean up and emerged shirtless. An employee told him he needed to get dressed and helped him retrieve a clean shirt from his carry-on. Unfortunately, though, his behavior only became more disruptive from then out. According to authorities, Berry proceeded to wander around the plane for 15 minutes and repeatedly groped flight attendant Tamara Burgess. He then punched a second flight attendant, Jordan Galaza, who was attempting to intervene. Footage captured by passengers showed Berry fighting as crew members wrestled him into his seat and strapped him in with duct tape. He screamed for help and yelled statements about being white and his parents being millionaires, only to be silenced with a piece of duct tape that was placed over his mouth. Berry could be seen trying to free himself in the viral video, but he remained securely in place until the aircraft touched down in Miami. The disruptive young man was escorted off the plane by law enforcement and was then booked on 3 counts of assault. He initially maintained his innocence in social media posts, describing the incident as the most dehumanizing experience of his life. But Berry eventually changed his tune and pleaded guilty as charged. He was sentenced to 60 days in jail, followed by a year of probation. Berry's defense attorney, Jason Kreis, told the court that the jail sentence was unnecessary and that his client had acted out of character during the drunken tirade. Kreis also argued that Berry had suffered plenty in the form of his severely tarnished reputation and said that his client looked forward to completing his punishment and moving on with his life. The young man's parents apologized on his behalf to the court, and Berry expressed remorse for his actions. But for those who were most affected by Berry's actions, the regretful words were far too little, too late. The flight attendant Berry attacked, Jordan Galaza, described the sentence as a disgusting miscarriage of justice. Speaking with Miami-based station Local 10 News, he said that Berry had made an enemy of everyone on the flight and implied that being duct taped to his seat was a greater form of justice than the slap on the wrist that was handed down by the court. And flight attendant Tamara Burgess echoed Galaza's sentiments about the 60-day punishment not being harsh enough.
8. Air Canada chaos. During takeoff from Calgary, one day back in 2014, a tire burst on an Air Canada's Jazz Aviation aircraft, forcing it to land 200 miles away from its destination in Edmonton. When the plane finally touched ground, its right side landing gear collapsed, causing one of its 5 propellers to break loose and slice through the cabin's wall. The wayward propeller smashed into the head of a passenger named Christina Curlow, who was quickly rushed to the hospital with a concussion. She later told Global News that she was lucky to even be alive, and that the outcome could have been a million times worse. Curlow said that she was suddenly smacked in the head and only remembered bits and pieces of what happened afterwards. Luckily, doctors had an optimistic outlook for the woman, who was left with a large bump on her forehead and heavy bruising and scratches. 3 other passengers from the 75-person flight also received treatment for some minor injuries. The incident left airline officials questioning whether the aircraft was affected by a design or a manufacturing flaw. Just 6 years earlier, in 2008, a plane of the same make and model was grounded for a few similar incidents while operating under Scandinavia Airlines. 7. Couple's post-wedding crash. In late 2020, a United Airlines pilot named Kostas John Civilis and his fiancée, flight attendant Lindsay Vogler, eloped together to Colorado from their home in Florida. They tied the knot in a modest mountaintop wedding ceremony, then spent a few days honeymooning there before heading back to Florida in their private plane. Shortly after taking off from Telluride Airport, the small Beechcraft Bonanza aircraft crashed into the San Juan Mountains. Rescue crews quickly realized the couple had died in the accident and just focused on recovering the newlyweds' bodies. They were only married for 4 days before they tragically lost their lives. At least they were able to tie the knot before the tragedy. Lindsay's sister Courtney started a non-profit called the Lindsay Vogler and Kostas Civilis Memorial Fund as a way to heal her grief and help others mourning the loss of a loved one. The money raised will be used to send families on trips as they navigate through difficult grieving processes. 6. Emory Worldwide Airlines Flight 17. The night of February 16, 2000 started out like any other for the 3-person crew on Emory Worldwide Airlines Flight 17, a routine cargo flight from Reno, Nevada to Dayton, Ohio. But things went terribly wrong just seconds after the McDonnell Douglas DC-8 took off from its regularly scheduled stop in Sacramento when the crew reported having control problems. The captain immediately requested a return to Sacramento and tried to navigate the plane back to the airport for an emergency landing. He declared an emergency to the crew and told the air traffic control tower the aircraft had an extreme center of gravity problem. The crew tried to stabilize the plane as best they could while it swayed to the left and right and moved erratically, failing to obey any of the controls or maneuvers they attempted to input. Less than 2 minutes after taking off and before they could make it back to the airport, the pilots lost complete control of the DC-8 plane and crashed into a salvage yard, hitting hundreds of cars and causing fuel tanks to rupture and explode. All 3 crew members died in the horrific crash. A National Transportation Safety Board (NTSB) investigation found that the rod for a part of the plane's right elevator control tab had detached, causing the loss of control. The agency also blamed Emory Worldwide Airlines for a faulty maintenance procedure, causing the improper rod attachment, as well as the company's failure to properly inspect the flawed part. Kathleen Stables, the widow of pilot Kevin Stables, chose to blame the Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) though, in a $20 million lawsuit, alleging that the agency failed to maintain proper oversight of Emory's maintenance procedures. In the months leading up to the crash, the FAA supposedly ignored the pleas of multiple Emory employees who begged the agency to investigate the airline for its disturbingly lackluster maintenance protocols. While it's hard to blame one specific party for all the failures that led to this deadly crash, it's probably fair to say that all those involved could have done a better job to prevent the accident. 5. Lapa Flight 3142. On the evening of August 31st, 1999, a Boeing 737 plane crashed while trying to take off from Jorge Newbery Airfield in Buenos Aires. Operating under the Argentine airline Líneas Aéreas Privadas Argentinas, LAPA, the aircraft was scheduled to take 98 passengers and 5 crew members to the city of Cordoba, just 475 miles away. Air traffic controllers lost contact though with the crew just a minute after takeoff started. In the meantime, the plane crashed to the ground below, slamming into cars as it barreled across a busy highway, colliding with the highway median and nearby road construction equipment. It finally came to a stop in a grassy area before bursting into flames. 63 passengers and 2 individuals that were hit on the ground died, while at least 34 others were injured, some seriously. It was one of Argentina's worst civilian air crashes in history. Fabian Alejandro Núñez, who escaped through the back of the plane, told The Guardian he could feel the aircraft losing control when it was just a few feet above ground, right before it hit the airport's perimeter fence. He saw the plane hit at least 3 cars and said some people were literally on fire after the explosion. An investigation found that the crew ignored an alarm that sounded by the plane's takeoff warning system as the 737 just sped down the runway. They mistakenly set the flaps to a fully retracted position instead of extending them, which prevented the aircraft from lifting off and led to this deadly series of events. The final report blamed many factors, including a lack of discipline among the crew, the pilot's chatter about irrelevant things to the flight, personal problems that affected their flying ability, insufficient psychological screenings, heightened emotions, and more. In a nutshell, it sounds like the crew mixed their work and personal lives way too much, causing a lack of professionalism that ultimately jeopardized their safety and the safety of the many lives that were placed in their hands. 4. Continental Airlines Flight 1404. Another Boeing 737 operating under Continental Airlines had just been cleared for takeoff from Denver International Airport on December 20th, 2008 when it ran off the runway and crashed. The flight was scheduled to carry 110 passengers and 5 crew members to Houston when the pilot suddenly lost control, causing the plane to skid across the taxiway and a nearby service road. It traveled several hundred yards, overshooting the runway by nearly 2,000 feet before it crashed into a 40-foot deep ravine. By then, the right engine had caught on fire. Firefighters rushed to the scene as the blaze spread to the fuselage. Crew members sprang into action, helping passengers escape through the side of the plane that wasn't still on fire. The aircraft was destroyed, but everyone managed to survive. 38 people were injured, and by the next day, all but 7 had been released from the hospital. Both pilots were experienced and had impeccable safety records under their belts, leading to little suspicion that they were at fault for this accident. First Officer Chad Levang told investigators the plane suddenly started to turn left while it was speeding up for takeoff, and that he and the captain had no idea why it happened. The NTSB initially suspected a brake malfunction, but ultimately determined the aircraft was likely just hit with an extremely strong gust of wind while speeding up for takeoff, and that the winds were much stronger than the pilots expected. In their efforts to remedy the problem, they misjudged the cause and failed to correct the plane's rudder, which would have been the most appropriate and effective response. 3. Fine Air Flight 101. Shortly after taking off from Miami on August 7, 1997, something went terribly wrong for the 4-person crew of a McDonnell Douglas DC-8 cargo plane from Fine Air. Known as Flight 101, the aircraft was bound for the Dominican Republic with more than 87,000 pounds of denim on board. But it failed to take flight once the plane started malfunctioning just a few feet off the ground. The DC-8 then pitched up, stalled, and crashed in a mini-mall parking lot in the heart of Miami, killing all 4 crew members and 1 person on the ground below. Initially, the tragedy seemed to be a case of shifting cargo throwing the plane out of balance. But the truth turned out to be much more complicated and scary. Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, discovered the plane's center of gravity was off and its trim was set improperly. This happened after something went wrong with the DC-8 that the crew was originally supposed to use, so a different one was flown in last minute. The plane they ended up using weighed slightly more than the one taken out of service, which required the loading crew to recalculate the center of gravity and the amount of cargo it could safely carry. They determined that 1,000 pounds of denim needed to be removed for safe flight. An employee determined the weight from the paperwork but forgot to actually remove the cargo from the aircraft itself. The new calculations also failed to factor in the weight of pallets and netting, putting the plane way over its maximum takeoff weight. Additionally, workers repositioned several pallets without indicating the changes on their own paperwork. As a result, the pilots miscalculated their input controls based on the inaccurate information given to them, which explains why they were so confused about the plane's erratic behavior. Fine Air was ultimately blamed for failing to properly oversee the cargo loading procedures, and the company tasked with loading the cargo was blamed for failing to properly oversee its employees' actions. Simply put, 5 people lost their lives due to a nightmarish mess of miscommunication. 2. Wayne County Airport collision. On December 3, 1990, the crew of a McDonnell Douglas DC-9 began heading toward the runway at Detroit Metropolitan Wayne County Airport. Designated Flight 1482, the aircraft was scheduled to fly to Pittsburgh under Northwest Airlines with 44 passengers. As the pilots navigated to their assigned location despite heavy fog, they missed a turn and became disoriented and lost. They quickly notified air traffic controllers, who realized the plane was on an active runway and instructed the crew to get off immediately. But it was too late for them to escape before being hit by a Boeing 727 that was speeding up for its takeoff flight to Memphis. The 727's wing sliced through the DC-9 below the windows and through its right engine, causing it to burst into flames. 10 of the 190 survivors were seriously injured, but nearly everyone who escaped alive was uninjured or sustained only minor injuries. Sadly, 8 people died on board, including a flight attendant and passenger who succumbed due to smoke inhalation while trying to escape through the tail cone's emergency exit, which failed to properly deploy. It was later found to be mechanically inoperable. All 154 passengers and crew members on the 727 were unharmed, although the aircraft itself was heavily damaged by the incident. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, blamed the collision on multiple factors, including a virtual reversal of roles by the DC-9 pilots. In other words, the first officer was taking a leadership position over the captain, and the captain's failure to exercise authority prevented the pair from properly reporting their confusion in a timely manner to prevent the disaster. Additionally, the NTSB accused the ground controller of taking too long to warn air traffic controllers of a possible runway incursion. impaired visibility, failure to use proper protocols for low visibility conditions, improper and confusing instructions, inadequate support for less experienced air traffic control employees on duty, and deficient signage, lighting, and surface markings were also cited as factors that contributed to the confusion that led to the crash. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, was blamed for failing to correct some of these deficiencies, while the Northwest Airlines was accused of failing to give its crew proper training and resources. 1. Taron Flight 371. The deadliest plane crash in Romania's history happened on March 31, 1995, when an Airbus A310 fell into a nosedive shortly after taking off. Operating under the country's flag carrier Taron, the plane was scheduled to fly from Bucharest to Brussels, Belgium, with 49 passengers and 11 crew members on board. First Officer Ionel Stoy was the designated pilot, while Captain Liviu Batanoi was tasked with certain maneuvers during takeoff. The flight voice recorder later revealed that just seconds into the flight, Stoy noticed his superior had failed to retract the slats. He asked Batanoi what was wrong, and the captain said he felt sick, then went silent, most likely after falling unconscious. Around the same time, the left engine went idle while the right remained in climbing power, resulting in an asymmetric climb. The plane then lost speed as it began to bank sharply to the left, but Stoy apparently failed to notice as he kept trying to wake Batanoi. By the time he realized he needed to regain control over the aircraft, it was too late. Just minutes after taking off, the commercial jet crashed violently in a field, killing everyone aboard and leaving a 20-foot deep crater at the impact site. An investigation found that there was an anomaly within the aircraft's automatic throttling system, but the crew was aware of the issue and knew how to control it. The case changed hands between agencies several times thanks to a lack of legal competence, and at some point, all the files just vanished. To this day, the exact causes of why the plane crashed remain a mystery.
Would you rather spend an entire flight sitting next to a screaming baby or a total creep who refuses to stop staring at you? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope to see you in the next one. Bye for now.